right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the North Sales Lightning webinar. It's been a while since we kind of put on a lightning webinar. We got a lot of them done during COVID, and Al and I and Jeff and the team were talking and said, we had a lot of stuff to talk about and kind of get excited about the coming year. So we kind of put this together. We got about 4 bullet points to go through. I want to introduce the team here. I'm not sure if you can see everybody, but Al Terhune is on board with Madeline Baldridge. They're the PanAm Gold medalists, along with Jackson Benvenutti, who's a longtime North associate and now a full-time North employee working with our One Design group, and Jeff Hayden, who's been working up with our Portsmouth loft and is kind of full-time into One Design right now, past world youth champion. So welcome, you guys. Thanks for being on board with this tonight. We're going to try to get all this done in about an hour. Hopefully you guys can see the slides here. We're going to go through some of the stuff with the PanAm Games and the gold medalists. We're going to talk a little bit about the Worlds in Cartagena, the Masters and the World Championships. We'll talk a little bit about what our winter sailing plans are for the next couple of months coming up. We got a pretty full schedule, and then touch a little bit about some of the sail development we've been working on over the past 12 to 18 months. So anyway, Al, welcome aboard, and congratulations also on your nomination for Yachtsman of the Year and the gold medal.
Thank you, Brian. I mean, it was a pretty fun whirlwind of a year, and I've been super lucky to sail with Madeline and Sarah, and we had a great time, and it was a pretty amazing experience from start to finish. It was a pretty unique one for sure.
So Al, let's talk a little bit about the games.
Yeah,
segue right into that. And
well, I mean, Madeline can jump in here too. I would say it was definitely a different format of sailing. Just from a racing standpoint, the races are not that long. I mean, they're fairly long, but your time on the water is not that long. They restrict how much time you can practice pre-race and when you can leave the dock, and there's a lot of rules. It was definitely odd that us and the Canadians were really the only ones that spoke English. So it was weird to kind of be on the outside of the language situation. But yeah, I mean, pretty nice sailing conditions, and racing was fun, and I mean, I think we had a good time.
So Madeline, maybe you can hop in here. I'm curious. Obviously, Al's been a long time. You work with North as one of our designers and working with stuff. How did you guys put the team together? What kind of came about that you guys did it? Maybe we could talk on the next slide, Al, a little bit about your guys' preparation.
Yeah, I think Allan and Sarah have been sailing together for a while on Lightnings, and Allan and I had been sailing together on a bigger boat doing some ORC stuff. So kind of just was, we were all in the arena, and then the gender rule change kind of just made sense to put the 3 of us all together.
What was the general idea or the thoughts for most of the teams competing? Were the South American teams kind of into the whole 2-in-1 kind of format? What was your general feel for what was going on down there with that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Brian, I don't even think it was even a topic. I think it was everyone was there as a team doing the best they could. I don't even think it was a thing. I mean, I think it was the best people in the boats, and I'm not sure anything was given to that. I mean, I don't even think it was a thing.
Just kind of like that's what the rule was, and that's what we're going to do, I guess, right? So
yeah, it was just the best teams were there, and I mean, I think the beauty of the whole thing was at the North Americans, whatever they want to call it, the PanAm format teams were 1-3, and it wasn't like, honestly, it's just the way the boat, in my opinion, the best teams won, and that's just how it was. So I don't know that it was a thing.
Yeah, kind of just sets up really well.
Yeah.
So why don't you guys talk a little bit about your prepreparation for that event? I mean, obviously it kind of came together in about 8 or 10 months, and maybe you can go through what you thought.
Well, I think, and Madeline can jump in here. I mean, a couple of things for us that I think we did that were unique. The first thing we did, we went to Davis Island, and we went with, us, the 3 of us, basically more to spend time together to make sure the 3 of us could go through the campaign without killing each other, and just see if it was even a fit. And we're lucky Jeff participated in 2 of our training sessions, and it was a good help. The first one at Davis Island was more just to get the boat out, see if we could do it. Jeff beat us up for a day, which was good. Kind of gave us a little feel for what we needed to work on, and we went from there. And then we kind of went to the trials, and it was a little, I would guess, a little bit unfortunate after our training days in Davis Island. It got really windy right before the event. We didn't get to do that much sailing, but I think for us, that was one of the harder events in that we hadn't sailed that much, but we learned a lot about each other and how to kind of move forward. And I think from there, we could talk about these other events, but my one big takeaway that I think we did a good job of is all three of us are super different people. And we were able to basically take the strengths of all three of us and turn it into an amazing team. And the one thing I think we did a really good job of was researching ourselves and researching the event and figuring out how to make it happen. And, I won't go into the kind of findings of all our research, but all of us did a good job of talking to people who had won before, those who hadn't won before, people who'd been to the games, people who'd done other stuff. And we really formulated a pretty detailed plan, knowing we only had so many training days and so many times to go sailing because everybody's busy, to make it work out the best. So I think that's the one thing for us is we just did a lot of homework, even more homework than sailing necessarily, to make sure we used our time wisely.
So, Madeline, talking a little bit about the training and stuff like that, you guys actually had a great performance at the North Americans. Is that kind of where you thought maybe the whole team was totally clicking? I mean, obviously it was a pretty diverse conditions at the North Americans, pretty good breeze in general. What are your thoughts on that preparation towards the games?
Yeah, the North Americans was kind of a unique event for us. I mean, the trials and the games themselves were both really small events. So the North Americans with the big fleet and long format and different sailing areas with different breeze was good for us in that it just kept us on our toes and forced us to adapt and learn really quickly and squeeze out of bad lanes in a big fleet, which is really tough. In smaller fleets, it's a bit easier sometimes to find clear air and sail fast in the normal mode that you're set up for when you tune by yourself or before racing. So the North Americans was kind of a fun challenge in that way.
So a little bit put you on the spot here a little bit, but you were doing the bow for the events, I think, correct?
Yeah.
So can you tell me and tell the team here a little bit about what your role was, what your job was, and what your focus was for as a bow person?
Trimming the jib during the pre-start and upwind, and then pull up, kite up at the windward mark, driving the pole downwind, dousing the pole and the kite at the leeward mark, and then obviously head out of the boat, hiking downwind, looking for breeze, helping steer the boat with weight for the waves downwind.
She's being modest. She's being really modest here.
It sounds a little modest.
And I will throw this a little bit. I mean, she definitely did a job of keeping my psycho mind under control most of the time. There was the few blowups there, but I mean, her job and role, and one of the things we learned quite a bit about, Madeline has real good eye for seeing wind and wind pressure. Probably, honestly, unlike most people, anyone I've ever really seen, she's really good at it. And one of the things we really learned, we sailed the trials, and how to transition our racing from looking for breeze, pressure, angle, and then shifting into traffic management mode. And that's something we worked on as a team really hard. And it was a big plus for us is when we kind of got into that approaching the windward mark area, how to shift from puffs and wind shifts to fleet management. And it paid big gains once we learned to do that together.
So if we go to the next slide, Al, we're going to see a whole bunch of shots of you guys kind of sailing there. And maybe you can talk a little bit about your setup. And one thing that jumps out at me is that I haven't hiked like the two of them in 20 years.
And I don't. So that's readily apparent. I mean, it was definitely big waves. I think the photos, in my opinion, make it look windier than it was in reality, because I don't think it was. I mean, it was breezy, but I wouldn't say any of us would ever say it was super windy. And if you look at the photos, I mean, the Traveler's still center in all these photos. I mean, it's not like it's blowing 18 to 20. I mean, it's pretty wavy, and you needed power to get through these waves. I mean, it's like the upper right photo is the one that kind of cracks me up, because you can see the powerboat's at the top of the wave and we're at the bottom. It's pretty far down. Like the angle down at the boat is pretty far. But
one of the questions Al that actually got,
Yeah.
we actually had a
Yeah.
few people did submit questions, and
Yep.
one of the questions was, what's the best pattern for steering over large waves? Also, guys,
Yep.
while you're listening in, and if you have something you want to
Yep.
add to the chat and ask a quick
Yep.
question, Al's going to kind of monitor
Yep.
those, so we'll try to
Yep.
get through as many as we can. So
I mean, steering lightning's tough because unfortunately you're going to pound waves no matter what you do. The boat's flat and it's just a fact of life. For me, it was always, how to keep the boat going as straight as you could, not let the waves push the boat around. And I think the one thing we talked about constantly was just getting the sail plan balanced so that the boat would want to go straight. And, again, Madeline had a really good eye of how to adjust the jib wire and, the sheet tension to kind of match the sails. And it's one of the things the coach that we had there was really helpful with, was making sure our sails matched when you look from behind the boat so the boat would go straight, which,
Right.
Isn't the easiest thing to do by yourself, but it was definitely helpful.
we're going to talk a little bit about waves when we talk about the worlds later on. But Madeline,
Yep.
were you doing a lot of adjustment with the jib sheet in these big waves, or what was how were you guys getting through kind of the not overpowered wavy conditions?
Yeah, definitely doing some adjustments. I think one lesson we learned the longer we sailed there was reining in the amount of adjustments we were doing with body weight, with the sails, trying to make the range pretty small, because you could end up chasing your tail and getting lost a bit because the waves were so big, so much bigger than we were used to anywhere else. So yeah, we started off making pretty big changes and then narrowed it a bit. Definitely, I think the small changes were still important, but our lesson was learned pretty quickly on the practice days to do a little less than felt right.
So maybe we could just go to the next slide because it shows a
Sure.
little bit of the contrast of what we're talking about. This is the top side, I think, is at the games, obviously, and the bottom
Yep.
one is at the North Americans, and obviously a little bit different, more space on the starting line, perhaps, or at least an easier way to find a lane.
I think the bottom left is actually the trials in
Oh,
Wrightsville.
I'm sorry, you're right. I apologize. Yep.
Yeah. And it was different. I mean, the interesting part of the games was a little bit starting because it was such a very left side favored track. And it's kind of funny that this is the photo that got chosen because I think this was the very last race of the regatta. We never started in the bottom third of the line except for the very last race, which was interesting. We can get into that. I guess that's a whole story in itself, but that was kind of the plan we came up with, was that was going to be our ticket to kind of win the event, and we stuck with. But yeah, it was tough. Getting around the waves was tough. And I think the one key was really keeping the boat level and keeping the boat straight. And to me, that was like the big takeaway.
So the games were a big boat speed contest. It looked like a lot of the course, at least following the track, or a lot of left side, and
it was. But I think that the one thing, and I'm gonna give as part of our research is, we've spent a big amount of time before the event getting our boat handling just to be perfect. And Brian Jr. and Jeff actually came to a training session we did in New Jersey right before we went. And it was funny. We did just a really basic tacking drill where we just kept lee bowing each other. And it was amazing how quickly both of our teams' tacks improved. And the other thing was kind of the fight that came out of everybody. Like, I remember, like, we didn't want to stop. It was actually invigorating to like go at each other for a while. And it kind of like, I don't know, got both teams going. It was a really good drill, but it paid in this for sure. Because in my opinion, Madeline can correct me if I'm wrong, we were much better at tacking, in my opinion. And when it got to these big waves, it was a half a boat length here or there. It doesn't seem like it's a lot, but it was a lot. And the other thing that was unique to the event was there was no offset at the windward mark. So you had to come in almost on port tack and do like a 180-degree turn and get the kite up. And, the training we did with these guys in Jersey, it was one of the parts was you need to be able to either jibe set or set without a pole and get going. And it was a massive thing for us. We'd go from in the lead by a length to in the lead by 5, or, in second or third to winning, you know, things like that because of the boat handling stuff. So while it was a boat speed place, I think personally, I think the reason we won the regatta wasn't because we were faster. I think it was because our boat handling was that much better.
That's an interesting point you bring up about the tacking practice, right, Al? I mean, what you were able to do was just focus on tacking. You didn't have to focus on other boats. You have to focus on marks. You guys just kept tacking, and by default, you're going to get better on it. So that maybe something anybody can do, whether they're in Riverton or St. Pete or whatever. They can just go out and practice with somebody for 20 minutes and get better.
And I think about that is you know, Sarah was good at talking through if we were tacking into a puff or not, and Madeline was really focused on making sure that the jib when we came out of attack was where it needed to be so that our landing angles were correct. And if I wasn't and I was off, to help me get back to where we needed to be quickly. And it was like, that was the difference in my mind of, you know, a top level, you know, jib trimmer versus, you know, just kind of going through the motions, was just helping us get through the tacks perfectly every time. And it's not just body weight, it's perfect trim, perfect everything. And it makes a big difference.
So let's step to the next slide. But you did bring up Sarah, and we haven't talked about Sarah real quick. You could just do 40 seconds on you know, her contribution to it. And
I mean, obviously she's the happy, fun one of the three of us. But she brings a level of intensity that's unmatched. I mean, you can see she's got a fire for it for sure. And you know, when we're going downwind, we just had an edge with her, you know, ability to trim the kite and do kinetics. And, you know, it was really good just to kind of get back to it. And again, I think the beauty of having Sarah with Madeline and I is we had three distinct people. And when it wasn't going great, there was always someone there to kind of get it back on the tracks, which was a good thing. I mean, one of the untold stories that, you know, I'm sure Madeline and Sarah and I haven't really talked about is, you know, we had a really good lead up going into the event and, you know, NAs and to practice in New Jersey. And we had a very good first practice day in Chile. And we had 2 or 3 more practice days leading up to the event, and they were not good. And I would say, I don't think panic was setting in, but the mood on the team wasn't exactly stellar going into day one. I mean, we were in, I won't say trouble, but there was questioning what we were doing for a little while. And to be honest, the first beat of the first race didn't go that well either. I mean, it was a touch and go moment for us, and kind of, I mean, I'll say it. I think our boat handling bailed us out. We had a credible kite set, got down the run, kind of, maybe it shook the team, and that was like we were off and running from there. But it definitely wasn't easy sailing. The first, you know, 3 practice days and the first beat of the first race were not great for sure. It was tough.
It's kind of cool to have the different personalities, and there's always, you know, even when things aren't looking so spectacular, it's, you know, being able to pull out like that. And probably once you realize that your boat handling was going to be able to save you in some spots, it made things a little bit easier. So Madeline, you did this slide. I think it's really cool, just because, you know, obviously we can't see exact sag off the mast, but you kind of drew some lines out there. Maybe you can just kind of go through this slide and see what you see on this with the trim setups.
Yeah, I used this photo as an example. I think like how Allan mentioned earlier, we spent way more time off the water, not sailing, preparing and making ourselves better at sailing while behind a computer screen or behind the phone. So photos like this, yeah, it's not taken perfectly down the center line of every boat, but you can use it as a rough gauge of about how much head stay sag everybody's got, looking at how each different team is coming into the windward mark and trying to learn about, you know, what was the outcome of this rounding? Did we like how we exited the mark? Did we not? And maybe why? So I think this particular photo, we ended up liking how we came out of the mark. We entered the ley line not quite super strong, but you can see we're set up for the rounding really early. We're all hiking. We're what I think in this moment is probably about the right amount of head stay sag. And we're able to pull ahead right after this. But yeah, just using the tools that you have to learn and make yourself better. So like watching the trackers back after a day of racing and then looking at the photos that everybody's putting up that same day. There's so many good photos that come out of all of these events. The North Americans had tons of them.
Yeah.
Looking at them with a critical eye is an important piece of the puzzle.
Well, one thing you and I talked about today when we were looking at these pictures, Madeline, is that, you know, you can see you guys on the left-hand side and your main's sheeted in pretty hard. And like you said, the sag or the profile of the jib is pretty consistent. And you look at the Chileans and you start thinking, wow, they have a lot of sag. That's a lot more, and it's not even on center line of the mast. But then if you look at their boom, their main sheet's been eased, right? And so, you know, we talk a lot about this at different clinics and stuff, and how you know, once you start easing your main sheet, then your jib gets fuller. And that's a little bit what you see here with these two pictures. You can see the Canadian team behind, they're strapped in pretty hard. They're trying to make sure they get up to the mark, and the Argentinians behind them are now, they're kind of reaching off, and they can see they have a little bit more sag. So, anyway, you know, remembering, you know, again, what we've talked about in clinics and online and stuff like that is, you know, as the head stay sags more, the jib gets filled up more. And it's a really good example of these images. So, why don't we step to the next slide or two here real quick, Al? We're going to kind of keep moving along. I don't want to keep everybody.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, I think these just kind of showed kind of the importance of getting the kite up and how everyone did it and what their jobs were. And yeah, I mean, that's what my takeaway was. I mean, we were kite up before we're even past the offset in some of these, and how critical that was for us. Because you could get, especially in Chile or these regattas, probably at the Worlds where there's big waves, if you could get on a wave and start surfing, you gain a ton, like huge amounts. So it was something we worked pretty hard on. Yeah.
Let's step on to the next one, because it's kind of a little bit of a wrap of your PanAm Games. I mean, we haven't had any questions yet, but, you know, maybe, you know, we talked about the crew format and the logistics a little bit, but, you know, your takeaways, other than it was a great experience. One of the questions we had in the brought in was, would for Al Terhune, would winning the PanAm Games in the Lightning class be your greatest accomplishment in sailing? And I know that's hard. It's pretty subjective because you've had a lot of success, but probably at that moment it felt pretty good. But you know, where would you kind of rate that in your sailing resume?
Probably, and it's going to be probably for reasons that people wouldn't expect. I would say it was because we built a program kind of around a belief of doing it, and quite honestly, I kind of refound the joy of racing, and it was mainly because of Madeline and Sarah, and kind of the effort we put forward, and our interaction is what made it special, and that we shared the experience together more than, you know, winning races. And I know that sounds kind of hokey and corny, but I think that's honestly the truth. And the reason I believe it is we still text each other every day, and we're talking about anything. It doesn't really matter. And it's like the team still goes on. And that's how you know it was like a special program, because it wasn't like we won the regatta and we were on to the next thing. We're still doing it. So I think from that perspective, yes, for sure. There's no doubt about it.
And so, Madeline, last question, a little bit about the PanAm Games. This came online also, and you know, what sail combinations did the U.S. PanAm Games teams use, and maybe you guys can share a little bit about what you saw in different sails on all the different boats.
Yeah, the whole event we stuck with the same sail combination. We used the M5 main and the V17 plus jib. We'd had done a bit of sail testing, and at the North Americans we used one day, I think, a V17 plus jib with a different panel layout, but we stuck with the standard one for the PanAms, which the Canadians were using the same sails as we were, and the other 7 or 6 teams were all using the same main, but with the 5A plus jib, I believe. Is that right, Allan?
Yep.
Okay. That kind of gives us a little bit of an idea, and certainly answers the question, you know, what the South American teams have been using. They have been sticking with the 5A plus for a while. And, you know, the V17 plus is a little bit new. We'll talk a little bit about sail development here later on, but we'll touch base a little bit. So thank you guys for sharing your experiences. If anybody has questions about the PanAm Games, reach out to Allan or Madeline. I'm sure they're happy to chat sailing lightnings with you.
I mean, one of the funny points about this, Brian, is that it'll look so beautiful in these photos. It was freaking cold.
Yes,
I mean, it like poor Madeline was in the front, just like in a fire hose. It was cold. And I mean, cold enough that there was penguins swimming next to the boat in the water. I mean, it was cold. So
was it cold on land too, or just because the water was so cold out?
It wasn't warm. I don't think it was warm. I mean, we were wearing long sleeves and pants the whole time, so it wasn't warm for sure. I mean, it was springtime with an Arctic current going up the coast, so it was not a warm event. But you know, it looks so tropical in the photos, and I was like, man, we had a lot of gear on when we were doing this. Like, it was cold. So
Well, I will tell you, that's the perfect segue, because we can go right and start talking a little bit about Cartagena, which was not cold. Jackson and Jeff were both in Cartagena. Al and Madeline had just kind of wrapped up the games and probably still had a little bit of a PanAm hangover. And but Jackson and Jeff were down at Cartagena. I was there as well. And guys, thanks for spending some time with us tonight. Let's talk a little bit about the Cartagena Worlds. You know, Jeff, this first slide here, maybe you can talk a little bit about the event and the organizers and what we're looking at here, or the overall feel.
Yeah, I thought they did a great job hosting us. That top left picture is actually the World's Masters Awards presentation on the Europeans, and it's the opening ceremony for the actual World. So it was really well done. The DJ played the 20th Century Fox theme song. If you don't know what that is, you got to look it up. It's perfect for award ceremonies. I played it for like 20 minutes straight. It was awesome. It was like my favorite thing, I think. And yeah, it was just awesome. They were hosted by we had the Colombian Navy band actually play for us multiple times during the event, and I'm like, well, we get the Colombian Navy here. I mean, this is we're just sailing lightnings here. But it was awesome. They were so welcoming. They did a great job putting on the event.
I think Paula Duat is the one who kind of was the event organizer, and she basically made sure everything was really well organized and run really well. You know, so a lot of the social stuff, you can see the picture of the party bus that went to another venue that a whole bunch of people on the beach. Jackson, I think you went and made that party happen, right?
I thought that was a fire engine.
No, that was a party bus.
Yeah, they had about like four or five of those one night. It was pretty fun. And you know, they really did a great job hosting us. It was a lot of fun. Different things planned almost every night, and kind of treated us like royalty. It was a good time. And I think Maggie, my girlfriend, took these pictures. So okay. She's good with the camera in her hand. She takes a lot of pictures all the time.
Yeah, almost all these pictures are Maggie's.
Yeah.
Thank you, Maggie.
Yeah. Thanks, Maggie. Yeah.
So well, we hop to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about the venue. The event was held at the Club Naval, which is at the end of a peninsula. Cartagena is a, you know, if you talk to the people who were there, I think it was 87 or 85, it might have been 85 or 87. I apologize for not knowing the year, but they never sailed on the outside. Everything was sailed on the inside of the bay. And the reason that changed this year is the amount of development. I think that somebody told me the tallest building there in the 80s was like 12 stories tall. And there must have been 50 buildings that were 30 stories or more taller, all dotting the shoreline. So it's a little bit like the development you might see in Miami or even St. Pete. So there was just a lot more buildings blocking basically the bay venue. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But this is kind of the parking area. Every boat came out of the water every night, and this is where all the repairs took place, basically. But we'll talk a little bit about that. But you know, I will say that this class is really blessed to have Tom Allan. He basically almost single-handedly, along with Ian Jones, kept the fleet together between the two events. We broke a bunch of masts. We'll talk a little bit about why some of that happened. But you know, again, a tribute to Tom, because he was just amazing. I mean, we spent nights till 11 o'clock at night at the boat park, making sure people were ready to go sailing the next day. So anyway, this is the kind of boat park, and you see it says the morning push and pull. This is where the boats slept at night. And if we go to the next slide, if Al's still with us.
This one or one more?
The next slide here. No, I'm sorry. Go back up. I apologize. Yeah, so this is how the boats got in the water every day. And Jeff, maybe you talk a little bit about the cadets and how this kind of all worked together, right?
Yeah, it was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be, that's for sure. My goal was just to get on the boat without getting too wet each morning, which is a little selfish. I made Brian Jr. and Brandon hold the boat. And one
Such a
one day,
baby.
yeah, JBC, right? Um,
Yeah.
one day we were coming in and you can't really tell how shallow it is. So it was pretty funny. All the boats will be pretty close, maybe 20 feet away from the beach, and you'll send one of your teammates off and they'll dive in and they think it's going to be waist deep or something. And they just go totally under and you don't see them for a minute. And they come swimming back up and grab the boat and try to paddle in. I thought it was pretty funny, but the cadets they made it really easy. They were like running around, pulling boats, getting us out of the water. It went really quick and easy. So awesome job.
Yeah, the amount of boats, I mean, obviously we had to put in what 40 some odd boats every day, and then more importantly pull them out, and obviously in's a whole lot easier than out. And then this beach is what, maybe 75 yards across, so there's a lot of boats to squeeze into that spot. And when everybody tried to get in at the same time, sometimes got a little bit interesting. So it was always the racing on the course was one thing, and then the race to make sure you were one towards the front of the line at the pullout with the cadets where they ran out of steam at the end of the night. But they did it was a big effort. It was a monumental effort to get boats in and out of the water, and they did a really good job. So while we talk, go to the next slide here, Al. We'll talk a little bit about the conditions. Maybe Jackson, you and I have talked a lot about this, and you had a kind of a bird's eye view, kind of knew what was going to happen every day before it happened. So maybe you can touch on what you saw.
Yeah, I mean, we were really fortunate to have a great spot in one of these big high rises you see on the right side of your screen that was on the beach overlooking the course, or the outside course, for most of the racing, or I guess half of it, and all of the masters. And we were like 22 stories up. And so wake up, walk out on the balcony in the morning and look out into the distance. And if you could see any hints of whitecaps, even way off on the horizon, you knew it was going to be a windy day. And the trade winds that you see in red on the left side of your screen, sometimes they would make it all the way into our sailing course, and sometimes they would not. So if you could see it, you knew it was going to be windy, and to prepare for a big wavy, multi-directional wavy day and a windy day. And it got really gnarly really quick, once or twice, as Brian was saying, enough to have the fleet break 7 of the masts. And Brian was being a little modest. He was in the boat park early mornings, late nights, helping out Tommy and Ian. And I can't say enough good things about the class and the people that were helping. We were one of the boats that broke the mast. We actually turtled on the last day of the Masters, and the mast didn't hit the bottom, but we learned it was from the swells with the mainsail loading and unloading that snapped the mast in multiple places. So that was a bit of an ordeal to go through one day, in the very, very hot boat park the next day, trying to get all that done and helping other people. And I mean, it was so hot. I think I felt like I seared the side of my face trying to sight the mast while retuning it. The black spars got really hot really quick, and you did not want to touch them. So yeah, we either had kind of 2 different conditions on the outside course. Either the trade winds came in and the waves were from multiple directions, swell and chop and really windy, or mostly in the Masters racing, I think it blew kind of from the opposite direction along the coast, and we were beating up towards kind of a little tributary river sort of thing, where there was a big current line coming out of there with dirty brown water going into the ocean. And that made for some very unique sailing conditions, and very one side heavily favored course.
It's almost reminiscent, Jackson, of those first couple of days of sailing in Savannah. If everybody's ever sailed in Savannah, you'd see there was like a rip current sometimes. If you're on the right side of the rip current, you were in Fat City. If you were on the wrong side of the rip current, you were not going to do well. And there was a rip current right down, 2/3 or 50% of the way right down the middle of the course sometimes. And I think that was it was interesting. You don't think that much about current until after the first race, and we went, wow, that water is moving out there. So
yeah, the tides weren't, high tide to low tide, at least on the information I could find, were not very large, but there was a lot of water moving, and it was very definitive line on the left side of the course. And the further left you went, the better and better and better it got. And You know, you kept seeing somebody get a big kind of left-hand shift, and they'll be like, all right, maybe this is enough. We'll try to get back towards the mark a little bit. And I don't think that worked almost ever, maybe twice when we had those wind conditions. It was better just to get out of the current as hard as you possibly could, to the point where you think you're going to be reaching into the weather mark, but you're getting back into the worst current, which is going down the track, and you're nowhere near overlaying. It was a kind of a wild place. It was reminded me of Charleston, similar to Savannah, like you were saying. And luckily I went to college there, and so I've done a lot of sailing in current like that, and that helped out the first few days for sure.
So just
Yeah, we
just to
found the shift
clarify,
was never
just to
enough.
clarify the I'm sorry, the image on the left there, that little green dot is about the location where the Club Naval was. So we're pretty far up in the sky. That's the top of South America there, and you can see obviously ripper and trade winds. And you know, as Jackson noted, if they ever took that left-hand turn around the top of South America, it came on. And guys, it came on pretty quick, right, Jeff? I mean,
Instantly.
you know, it'd be
Came
like
on
all of a
really
sudden,
quick, yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, all of a sudden it's you know, putting on all your spray gear or boots and stuff, and bringing the rig back, blocking back, tightening the lowers. I thought it was weird early on the day. Sometimes the swell would be behind you. You'd be going upwind, surfing the big ocean swell from the trades. And then later, as it clocked around, it would get more in line, and you could kind of see like, oh, something's happening, and then it would build pretty quickly and get windy. So it was interesting, and it was kind of weird not really knowing if it was going to come in or not. Like there wasn't really a reliable forecast, so you're kind of going out winging it.
Yeah, the forecasts were
fun.
not very great, but look, you know, if you're
Yeah.
22 stories up and you could see the whitecaps, it's going to be windy that day. So we were fortunate.
So Jackson,
Yeah,
you and I were
just like
talking.
Jackson.
You and I were talking earlier, and you know, we talked about sailing in the waves, and you told me something that you guys were doing with the centerboard that you thought helped balance the boat a little bit when it got pretty gnarly wavy. You want to maybe touch on that and see if that's, you know, so.
Yeah, these pictures clearly are from the lighter air days, or actually maybe racing inside. But you know, one thing we were trying to kind of figure out was how to help balance the boat and help Josh drive through these big waves with chop, and you're going up the wave, and at the top of the wave the boat gets really overpowered, and then in the trough it's kind of underpowered. And so trying to set the groove up really wide with fairly twisty sails, and you know, trying to help the boat just track. And you know, I talked with Allan a little bit about it one night, and he was like, well, maybe try pulling the board up. So we pulled the board up about a pencil width, between a pencil and a finger. It's kind of hard to really dial that in. You have to make sure the boat's kind of stopped so it's not loaded before the race starts. And just having it up just a little bit, as well as all the other controls that we were using to depower in that wave state. And you know, that was a very, very, very helpful thing for our team. I think that's where we traditionally haven't been a great heavy air and a big wave team. And we went really well. I mean, I think we rounded the weather mark in that windy Masters race in third. And that was a success for us, you know. So that was something that I took away. It was really important. And then the other thing that we have been doing really well in the last year or two is really having a lot of great marks for the main sheet and the backstay and the other things, and whippings on the lines. And those two things seem to really pay dividends for us.
Just to make sure you have repeatable settings, and so when you know you're going fast, you know to pull it to the green mark or the red mark or the orange mark, right? So.
Yeah, you know, I put marks on the main sheet that as it exits the block on the boom and goes down to the ratchet block, we have a little line with a ring on it that helps to keep the lines from getting sucked into the ratchet block. And I would read the marks off of where that ring was, you know, it would always pretty much be in the same spot. So I had a few different marks there, and that would just help double check to make sure we were in the right spot, you know. But besides, it's kind of like a belt and suspenders thing, you know. You look at the sail and you can feel the power in the boat, but then you can double check that to make sure that's good too. And then also on the backstay, we have whippings as the backstay sheet, if you will. The line, the triangle in the back exits the boat. So, you know, multiple different colors, and you pull it down to the deck and take note of that, and you can get it back on before you go around the gate. You know where it's supposed to be.
So Jackson, you said with Josh and Monica, and you guys had a great series. I think you were 4th overall at the Worlds and 2nd at the Masters. Is that right?
That's right.
And so Jeff, you came down just to sail the Worlds, and you sailed with Brian Jr. And you guys are maybe one of the youngest teams, if not the youngest team there. and had a lot of great results. And maybe you could talk a little bit about this inside sailing. We don't want to talk about sailing outside because you had a lot of alphabet soup out there with your starting prowess. But let's talk a little bit about sailing on the inside and what you guys thought about sailing in the bay for a couple of minutes real quick.
Yeah, so in the bay was probably more typical to a normal venue that we would sail lightnings in. It was flat water, puffy, shifty, but really nice sailing, I thought. A big takeaway for us was really, it kind of goes back to the slide that you showed earlier from the PanAms about the head stay sag. And a lot of the time, there'd be some pretty big holes and pretty big puffs. So you're blocked at 1.25 inches, kind of in a light air setting, set up for the lulls. And when a puff hit, I would use the Traveler a lot of the time for Brian, so I didn't have to use the main sheet. And that seemed to really help keep everything settled and not lose head stay tension, because as soon as you use the main sheet, head stay flies to leeward and the jib gets fuller pretty fast. So just kind of playing the Traveler a lot, and that seemed to work well in the puffy stuff. Another big takeaway that I had was just ley line awareness in the shifty conditions. I tend to, like, one of my personal struggles is I'll be tacking on some shifts and gaining. Maybe we pass 2 boats here, 2 boats there, and I get a little bit overconfident and I swing a little bit too hard on the next shift. So we did one. We were right behind Martinetti, who won the regatta. We ducked him. We were on starboard. He was on port. We ducked him in a nice right shift, and we went a little bit too far, and tacked eventually. But when the left shift came back, it came back pretty hard, and we ended up overstood and lost 6 or 7 boats. So it's kind of one of those things where I'm like, well, I was right about it coming back left, but maybe I should have just been on the left edge of boats and not been as high risk. So I don't know, Jackson, what did you think about sailing inside?
Yeah, I thought you made a great point about, it being puffy. You'd be sailed up for the lulls, and then the puffs were pretty big when they'd come through. Like, you'd be like, the boat's fully looking for power in the lulls and it's fully overpowered in the puffs. And using the Traveler keeps the head stay kind of more static, and I found the same thing. And I think that's a very common thing in most boats in flat water and puffy conditions, is trying to not have the sail plan change so drastically, kind of like what Allan and Madeline were talking about. And yeah, it was very shifty, very puffy, constantly having your head out of the boat. It was very much chutes and ladders. So, like we said, setting the boat up for the lulls, but knowing which controls to use to depower, like being the Traveler or using the jib and a big lift to try to help the boat come up, and just being constantly proactive, getting to the wind and then adjusting the things as you touch the puff, and then start to put them back as you go into the lull. But it was a very heads up sailing out of the boat. I mean, sometimes you were hero, sometimes you were the zero. But it was fun sailing for sure.
Well, I think both your team sailed really well. And maybe we go to the next slide.
Yeah. Come on.
Maybe we can go to the next slide. But obviously these guys sailed really well. So congratulations, Jonathan, Mara, and Allison. They not only won the South Americans handily, but obviously the World Championship as well. Everybody's really excited about them. The Ecuadorian teams. I mean, a lot of us have been to Salinas, and there was just a lot of enthusiasm. This is our first Ecuadorian World Champions, and it's really great for the class to kind of spread the wealth and get some other countries involved and excited about sailing. So congratulations to them. Maybe we could just go to the next slide too, Al. And you guys have probably all seen the results, but this is borderline total domination. The first 4 races, I think, guys, correct me, maybe the first 3 or 4 were outside in a variety of different conditions, kind of light air, with big current. First race and a half, and then a lot more wind. And in race 3, we kind of came inside, and it didn't seem to matter to Jonathan and the team. They kind of just kept banging out top 5 finishes. That's the way you win world championships, or any championship, right? Just hang in there and be consistent. You know, congratulations also to these other teams. David defending his world championship, really did really well after the first race, just got better and better and just trying to hang in there. Augie with Laura and Kim, another PanAm format team, also just constantly consistent finishes. So
I mean, Brian, I think that's the one thing, you know, about that you brought up before, but you know, the PanAm format teams won the Worlds, the North Americans, the South Americans were 3 of the top 5 at this regatta. I mean, I keep going back. I don't think it's just a thing to do for the games. I mean, I think it's actually, you know, great for the class to see. I mean, it truly is equal for everybody. And I think that's the point.
Well, it's, you know, it's obviously Leighton's just a great, you know, for a guy, someone like me, I need the 2 smallest people on the planet to go sailing with these days. So, you know, obviously, you know, sailing with 2 women is a great thing. You know, the other person I wanted to really point out, Connor Godfrey sailed a really good regatta. Him and his team, they kind of put it together. They lost one of their teammates who passed right before the event and kind of stepped in, and they sailed a very, very good event. They sailed a good South Americans. I think they won a race in South Americans. It was just good to see Connor back out there and competing and doing it. And I'm pretty sure it was a chartered boat from South America that these guys did, and I don't think that they shipped a boat down. So, you know, congratulations. And then, you know, Jeff and Brian won the 2-letter championship, right? They had two races where they were U flagged or DFD and BFD'd, and I think they were the top team with 2 letters. So they, again, young team out there doing it and Parker right in front of them. So anyway, it was a lot of fun being at the event, and it was hot. It was really hot. It was hard to get away from the heat, even at night. It wasn't that cool, but the hospitality that they did, it was just great. And listen, when you get down to it, the racing was really a lot of fun. I mean, some of it was challenging. There wasn't a condition that we missed. We had it all. I think we even had a lot of rain at one point, so we just had everything. So anyway, thanks to the World Championship Committee and all the participants. It was a lot of fun to be down there. But let's step on to next. What's going to be going on next for us? That's, you know, that's winter sailing, and it's, you know, kind of, it's always fun to review what's happened in the past and hear from the champions and hear different insight. But let's start thinking a little bit about where we're going next. And Jeff, maybe talk a little bit. You're going to be at the Helly Hansen Regatta coming up in a week and a half or so, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. We'll be there. It's always a fun one. There's so many boats, and off the water is pretty fun too at the Helly Hansen Regattas.
And then we have the Winter Champs coming up in St. Pete. That's March 16th to 20th. And then the Midwinters are going to be down at Coconut Grove again for 3 days at the end of March. And then the mentor program in some way, shape, or form will be taking place down. So over the next 7 weeks or so, we've got 3 pretty big regattas coming up for the class. Obviously, the more people that we can get down there to come do it and join us, whether you come down for the mentor program, come down for for the parties, whatever, let's get as many boats as we can on the line. So we'll talk real quick about the next slide here, because we don't want to go too long tonight, but Lightning's in St. Pete. The next 2 events are going to be at St. Pete Yacht Club. First one's a little bit peculiar because it's a Helly Hansen, and there's quite a array of different fleets and boats. The one big advantage, Jeff, I think, is that the Lightnings are the only boats dry sailing out of the sailing center. So that's kind of great for everybody. I mean, there's J70s and all these other boats that are going to be obviously sailing out of the yacht club, but the Melgus 15s and the Contenders and those boats are going to be sailing out of the beach. So the Lightning's going to have the quote unquote parking lot to themselves for the Helly Hansen. Jeff and I have talked a little bit about sailing in St. Pete. You guys, most of you know that I've really liked sailing in St. Pete. I've had a lot of luck there in a variety of different boats, and I kind of feel it's a lot like sailing on Long Island Sound. There's current and wind, and when the wind comes on, the waves come on. There's a sea breeze, and it's changed a little bit over the years as the lands have developed around the bay. But I think the big things for the Helly Hansen that people should be looking out for is the location of the race course. And that's a big deal insofar as where it is in the channel and where you guys are going to be sailing in that particular event. Sometimes during the Helly Hansen, they'll keep that lightning kind of group of boats a little bit closer to the pier that we might sail during the championship. And it's, as we get a little bit further north, even still up towards the Venetian Isles, it gets a little bit more current changing direction. So as you guys sort of kind of, obviously wind is a factor, but also playing the current and the water depths. Allan, you kind of agree with that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and kind of reiterate, I think two things. Well, both Jeff and I will be there, so I'll be on a J70, but I'll be there, and we're looking forward to, hopefully there's a lightning get together somewhere. We'll have to poke Laura and David and see where he's going to have his open bar for everybody one of the nights. I'm looking forward to that. I heard class president was going to pay for beers and stuff, so that'll be a good one.
He's not on, so that's it.
Exactly. I'm going to commit him to doing it because, I think it's a good thing. But, my biggest thing is St. Pete, it always seems to be a place, I think the current gets underestimated. It's why when you look at the results, there seems to always be, both events, the Helly Hansen and the Winter Championship, an excessive amount of black flags, in my opinion. And I think it's because, quite honestly, I think the current gets appreciated how it works there. So, I think that's one thing to keep in mind. And I think you're right. For the two regattas, probably will sail in two different locations. It'll probably be closer to the pier, maybe further north, for the Helly Hansen regatta, and probably for the Winter Championships be out on the plateau out there. It'd be a little bit different racing, but yeah, I think the one thing about St. Pete is it's really easy to kind of get focused on, well, I've seen this 1,000 times. This is what's going to happen, and a lot of times you can miss one if you get really focused on what you think So just being open-minded is a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think current's a big deal. I think when you get into the March event, it could be a little bit different, sailing in the plateau, sailing in the shallows. We've been pretty far south at the Winter Championships over the past couple of years just to go find breeze. And so they've been a little bit more aggressive doing that. And that's been good. It's been fun and different. So, but for those of you guys going to the Helly Hansen, pay attention to the tide, pay attention to, wind pressure, and if it's, going to be pretty hot during the day, at some point the sea breeze is going to come. And it's been a little bit later every year, but it will more than likely kind of start at 220 and could go all the way to 270. So just kind of be cognizant of that. So maybe just go on to the next slide here, see what we're talking, what's next here. Yeah, we just wanted to wrap up in an hour, so at the risk of rushing here.
So sorry, real quick, there was a question: what sails the world champ used at the regatta? Do you remember?
I'm sorry. What did Jonathan use?
Yep.
Jonathan had M5 and 5A plus jib and an R2 spinnaker. Yeah, top five, I think, were M5 mains. I think there were Jackson, you guys using a V17 plus. I think Augie's using a V17 plus. David's using a 5A and Jody's using 5A. So a little bit of a mixed match of what people are choosing on jibs. And that's actually kind of a nice segue. Al talking a little bit about the jibs. And you guys are, Ched developed the V17 plus based on the 5A plus mold. And so his idea was to do a radial sail that will hopefully hold its shape for a little bit longer and maybe have a little bit more durability and still keep that same 5A plus performance. And that's really what the V17 plus is. And, we're kind of working a little bit more towards even developing further on that. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about this, Al, and what you guys learned. I know.
Yeah. I mean, we, I think the one thing is, I think we as a group and, we're lucky to have people like Madeline and Ched working on this. We don't kind of sit around and just assume that what we have is the best and keep working on things. So, there's been a little bit of work on the jibs. I think we anticipated being fairly windy and chilly. I think it was actually windier at the Worlds in hindsight. I think we have a couple projects going on. We, looking at, some main stuff and looking at this new jib with a different panel layout, which I'm sure we can talk a little bit further in the next. I think Madeline would be better to discuss kind of what we're looking at here. But I think for me is that we're not just sitting still and trying to learn new things. I think we actually learned a lot this summer, and I had some really great calls with Madeline and Ched just talking about different sail options and details. I mean, it was fun for me from having been away from the boat for a while. And, in the past I'd used the MF2, JF2 all the time, and kind of switched to the M5 program for this year. And I think for me, it was a good eye-opening kind of step, and kind of made it a little fresh for me, and it was good. So
let's talk about what we're looking at.
Yeah.
The main that you're looking at there is an M5 main. It's just a mold main, and so what that means is that we've basically taken the M5 and Ched has kind of mimicked it, so we can create a mold and theoretically do easier shape changing. So that's the first mimic of an M5 main. I thought all of us thought Jackson and Jeff and Allan, myself, did some testing down at Davis Island last month, taking a look at these sails for a couple hours, and I think we all thought the sail was really, really smooth. I think all the numbers hit. So we're going to keep working on developing that sail, and maybe hopefully have that production ready here. But again, there's no rush. It has to be perfect before we build them. And maybe we just go a little bit to the next slide and bring Madeline here and talk a little bit about this. This is a V17 with the altered panel layout, and you can see that obviously it's got a radial head, just like the V17 radial clue, but it's also got radial mid panels and kind of a tack spike radial head. Maybe you could talk a little bit about this panel layout and what we kind of call helix. Maybe we can use quotes around that, but let's maybe talk a little bit about what we're seeing here.
Yeah, I think the structured luff aspect of this kind of helix idea, and you can see it here, how dramatically different the luff looks. And it's flattening the sail without dragging the draft forward. And that's coming from only one control, just the jib cloth. So I think this shows a lot of potential that I think could make for a much better performing setup, instead of having to kind of fiddle around up forward, getting the wire tension and then pulling on more cloth tension and then easing the sheet a bit to not be too shut down. Just pulling on the cloth tension and having that be able to project the luff forward and to windward, flattening the sail, not dragging the draft forward, is a pretty cool concept. So this is, I think, to me, this looks really promising for a big step forward.
I think it does too. We're going to keep working on this, to simplify this, because I'm not a sail designer. I know enough about it to be dangerous, but if you do look at these two pictures, the sail on the left obviously is just a medium cloth. One of the questions that came in earlier was how much jib cloth is too much. And you can see on that sail there on the left, in this breeze that we were sailing in that particular condition, I think Jackson was the one fooling around with the jib cloth at that point. You can start to see some wrinkles coming out just right by those telltales, and that's kind of always a good indicator that you haven't overcooked or over tightened the jib cloth. And obviously, if you have wrinkles all the way up, sometimes you could definitely make an argument that maybe is probably going to be too soft on the jib cloth. And the picture on the right shows it pretty much smooth all the way. And the reason we're trying to showing that image to show what changes. You can see the sail flattens, and the top twists open a lot more. But the other thing too to notice is the fact that there's no little wrinkles, no little luff wrinkles, and that probably for most people, most of the time in average medium light conditions, that's going to be way too tight on the jib cloth. So, but you can see what happens when you do use the jib cloth, kind of what happens to the sail shape and powers it up. And then in this particular case, when you tighten the jib cloth, and how much flatter the sail will get. And Madeline made a good point where in this particular case, with the way that this kind of is set up, is that it doesn't really change the draft from position dramatically. Anyway, that's kind of hopefully answers that jib cloth question, is that too much is probably, I'm always looking to get a little hint of wrinkles down by those lower two snaps until it starts getting really breezy. So
yeah, I mean, I still go back to it. I just think the exciting part is that everybody's kind of in on doing and trying things, and we're not just sitting around and doing the same old and learning from sailing other boats. And I think it's been great. Obviously Ched's still with us, and he's on the call listening in, I'm sure chomping at the bit to tell us what we're saying wrong here. But I also think it's great that we have Madeline, who's coming at this with a little less time than Ched, obviously, but a different eye and different experiences, and we're kind of trying new things. And I think that's pretty fun, to see how our team is changing and, stuff that you and I did 20 years ago, Brian, and, you know, Jackson and Jeff are bringing different perspective, and Madeline, and we're kind of keeping the wheels moving, which I think is really good.
So just real quick, guys, I'm just going to touch on this before we go to the last slide or two, is that one question was that has been brought up a lot is about the jib lead position. And, you know, this is, excuse me, not exactly the picture to talk about it, but we did brush on this when we were reviewing this earlier today. And what are you guys' thoughts about, you know, how much you're moving the jib lead? And maybe Jackson, you could weigh in on this a little bit. And, you know, we do put those trim lines on each sail that kind of keep that jib sheet lined up with the line. And what are your thoughts on how much we're moving the lead position?
Yeah, I mean, we, especially at the Worlds, but even in the past, we haven't really moved the jib leads all that much. We kind of look at the trim line, make sure that sail's breaking evenly along the telltales up and down the luff, and kind of just going off that. The maximum amount that we moved the jib lead was probably 1/2 inch on our boat. You know, especially in the wave state outside, if you moved it back and then when you went to ease the jib, when the main started blowing up on the top of each wave, it would twist open way too much. And it just would kind of keep the boat out of unbalanced, kind of balanced and unbalanced, balanced and then unbalanced. So, you know, when we got inside, I think we might have been able to move it back a little bit just because it was such flat water and you didn't need the grunt in the sail and kind of have a little bit of a flatter shape. But we're not moving it all that much, just literally 1/2 inch. We have a scale along the bottom of the jib track, and we went from 3 to 3.5, and it's anywhere in between that. So it was pretty minimal jib movement, but we were playing the sheet frequently a lot. And I think that's one of the things about the V17 Plus is it's a radial sail, and it seems like it could actually trim a little bit tighter than the 5A, but you got to be active on the jib sheet to keep the boat really rolling. Especially if it's very wavy. And I think that's probably more important than moving the lead is trimming this jib sheet effectively and actively.
And I think, Madeline, you talked about that at the games and your jib sheet, like not necessarily so much focus on the lead, but just making sure that going up and down waves and stuff like that, your sheet tension was kind of following around. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. We probably ended up moving the jib lead about as much as Jackson is saying, not too much, 1/2 inch maximum, but yeah, definitely active on the jib sheet.
So I think that's one thing I would caution people about. I know that the Lightning jib's a very high aspect sail. It's very tall and skinny, right? It's not like a J24 Genoa or something like that. And so I see people say, you know, they say, oh, we're going to move the lead back because it's getting windy, and they tend to move the lead back, you know, 2 inches or something pretty extreme. And then the bottom of the sail gets very, very bored flat and the top opens up. So you lose all your power. And not only that, but that, you know, from the tack to the clew, it gets very straight. And then it's because there's so much foot round in the sail, it'll start flapping because under the load. And once, you know, Ched told me, once the sail learns how to flap, it always will flap. And so you know, if there's a point that you ever get to the point where you're trimming the jib and you kind of got it in the right part of the spreader and the bottom of the foot starts flapping, it probably means your lead is too far back and you want to kind of sneak it forward. I definitely wary about people pulling the leads back too far in breeze. And I agree with both Madeline and Jackson. I don't know about Al, but you know, I'm big into using twist and getting the lead profile of the jib to change as I need to in the big breeze and the waves. So
yeah, I mean, I think to clarify and you know, Jackson's right, with the V17 you definitely can trim harder, and I think, you know, when Madeline's talking about adjusting the jib, I again, she can correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, her adjustments are tiny, and with 2-to-1 jib sheets the jib isn't moving that much. Like even in the big waves, it wasn't like she was easing an inch of sheet and pulling an inch of sheet back on. I mean, she was moving it in such tiny increments that, I mean, I think it'd be hard for most people to really tell. I mean, I could tell because I could feel it on the helm, but it wasn't like you were seeing, like, you know, this kind of jib sheet moving. It just wasn't happening. I mean, I think just to be a little sensitive when we're talking about, at least from our perspective, how much, like with the chop, she was adjusting the way the sheet. I don't think it was dramatic. I think it was more, if the pressure went down, she would ease the sheet a little bit, or if the pressure came up, she would trim harder. But and maybe it wasn't just because it wasn't as windy where we were, but I wouldn't say like it was a huge range. I mean, yes, she was adjusting the sheet, but it wasn't a huge range.
So Al, that's a great point, because the high aspect ratio of the jib, right? A little bit means a lot at the top, right? So an inch of sheet could be
Yeah.
3 inches, 4 inches at the top of the sail. And
Yeah.
so, using that top telltale you see there in these pictures,
Yeah.
keeping that, for the jib
Yeah.
trimmers on the call, medium light air, in most conditions, you want that telltale streaming, and that's going to tell you if you got a stall or not. And so, but again, in 3/4 an inch, half an inch of trim, it could move it inside the spreader, 2 inches pretty quickly. So,
Yeah.
Anyway, let's go on to the last last slide, and we'll brush a little bit with these chat questions. Al, maybe you can just go on to the next one.
Yep, sorry. Yeah.
And so this is a tuning matrix that I think started with Ched, right, Al? And then,
Absolutely started with Ched. Yes.
Okay.
He's
And,
probably, yeah,
go
I
ahead.
mean, for me, the biggest one is, we, in my mind, we kind of eliminated wind strength and kind of went to the reaction of the boat, and it kind of takes care of crew weights or sailing style. And, I think for us, we lived, there's a question about, blocks and lowers and making it complicated. I mean, I think on our boat, we lived at 1 1/4 inches, and then maybe would move to 1 1/8 inches. And that was our zone for 99% of the races. And our lower turns were maybe within a 2-turn range, but we did not adjust the rig, especially the blocks, in a huge amount. And it was all basically just living on the edge of being able to keep the boat powered up and maybe have a touch of backstay on so the main looked right, and that the mast didn't bounce in the waves. But everything for us was based off of what we saw here, where people were sitting and kind of how the helm was reacting. It wasn't it's blowing 12, we need to change blocks. We didn't think about that at all. It was never a wind strength conversation. It was where we're sitting in the boat and how the boat was reacting. But I couldn't agree more. This tuning, especially coming from someone who sailed with the other sails for a long time, it looks daunting. It's really kind of the same thing, honestly. You're just trying to get the pre-bend right and match it, and it's not that complicated, honestly.
I think the big thing, Al, that I like that you and Ched have really focused on is getting away from saying 0 to 3 miles an hour or 5 to 8 miles an hour, because it's really irrelevant. What's relevant is how much you need to depower the boat to keep it going fast for your team. So if you're sailing around at 400 pounds, you might be at the fully hiking backstay coming on at 10, 12 knots of breeze. And, whereas I'm still at, light 2 in the boat at, that kind of condition. So it's really going to be about where your team can depower it. I think that's where people have to start thinking about wind velocities and thinking about, well, they see we're 3 up, we're fully hiking. Maybe we should be here, and forget about what the guy next to you is doing. So in understanding a little bit about the cause and effect of what these things do. Let's just
Yeah, I mean, to me, the trigger is you're pulling the backstay on, the main starts to overbend. That's when it's time to put the lowers on, right? I mean, what 3 up fully hiking for Jackson and Jeff might be different than 3 up hiking for people who don't hike, right? So it all depends on what's happening. If you keep pulling the backstay on, flatten the boat, which is fine, and you overbend the main sooner, you're going to have to tighten the lower sooner. I think it's fully a visual set of tuning to me.
So, and then this is for the M5, and just so
Yeah.
just so everybody's kind of up to date on this, we have actually gotten away from the flappy, I call it the flappy, kind of loose gauge, and more went to the PT, which is the black spring loaded one. And basically you used to do 0 and a 0 on the headstay, and then we would set the lowers to 0 on the thing. But there was so much variance in those gauges. They would open up and they'd be 2 numbers off. And so basically we think that the PT gauge is a little bit more consistent. We can actually set up both the MF2 setup and the M5 using that tuning gauge. And basically every time, so if you thought that, when you're setting your headstay at 0, basically you're using 7 on the black loose gauge and 11. So 7, 11 is kind of the base for starting. So I always start, I start at 1 1/4 inch, pull the backstay onto 7, put the lowers to 11, and that's kind of base, and that's kind of what we work off these numbers for. So so that a little bit touch base. We'll have this matrix updated on the website in the tuning guide. Obviously, be here on this webinar. And maybe I could just we'll just really quick, we'll take 2 minutes and just I just want to go through a couple of these chats if that's okay with you. Someone was asking a little bit about the and maybe it was Joe about basically the keep it simple approach, was, you know, we still sell and promote 2 different designs, the MF2 and what we are using is the RJF or the JF2. RJF is the radial JF2. That's kind of the set it once and forget it kind of setup. And that's, you know, Jeffrey, you guys used that sale when you got that setup when you won the Worlds in Greece a couple years ago, right?
Yep.
Yep.
We did.
And again, it's very simple. You
I would
kind of said it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty simple. It's definitely a set it and forget it type of thing. The sales will set up a little bit differently, but for the most part, I mean, in that kind of 8 to 12 knots, it can be pretty similar. So there's definitely good options for both people.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to remember with the other, you know, the MFJF program is it's a bigger range of adjustment with the jib wire, and you're controlling your headstay sag and in a lot of ways your mass bend and what the backstay does by just pulling the jib wire tighter. Whereas by blocking back and tightening the lowers, you're kind of straightening the headstay with the rig, and the other way you're straightening the headstay with the wire. So it's kind of the same solutions, but different methods of getting there, if that makes any sense.
So there was actually a question, Zane Yoder, who actually, congratulations, Zane, just bought a boat last week, it says, and it's asking a little bit about the jib wire. And, you know, listen, even with the M5 setup, we'll use the jib wire to kind of set headstay sag. Sometimes, you know, we just want to make sure the profile of the jib is kind of setting up right. Now, I'll move that wire, you know, a couple inches even when I'm sailing. The MF2 setup is very wire dependent. And if you basically, especially when the breeze comes on, you want to make sure you get that wire on really, really tight. Does it change the rake? Rake isn't really, it doesn't really necessarily change the rake. It has more to do with where the jib is setting up and where the mast is bending. And basically when you can start, how you can start depowering the program, so that when you start pulling more wire on the MF2 setup, it makes the jib force they go straighter quicker, flattens the jib quicker, so you can actually get to the backstay and trim hard enough. So anyway, let's see, do we have any other thing, or talk a little bit about that? And just planning. We're going to wrap this up here real quick. I apologize for going over. Just we started talking about so much stuff here. The ACCs are going to be a Marblehead this year. Again, married up with the Helly Hansen Regatta. WJMs and NAs are at our President's Club up at the Buffalo Canoe Club, beginning of August. There's a big run this year on the U32 regattas. The class done a great job with our juniors. Now we're going to try to keep that connection going with some U32 regattas. I know there's one planned for Buffalo, right, Jeff, and end of August, and I think there might be one TBD in Charleston. I think that's still coming up on the schedule. Jeff, are you part of the Lightning Lab program? Is that?
Yes, it's me and Lisa Marie. So if you guys are interested in hosting a lab at your local fleets, just send an email to us at that lightninglabs@lightningclass.org, and we will work with you to set one up. So
yep, take advantage of it. Lightning Class does a great job of supporting education, and you know, between the mentor program and the labs are available, you know, get your group together and get some of the experts out there to spend some time with your fleet. Last thing, obviously, lightningclass.org regatta schedules are all posted. Facebook's another great place, and don't forget to pay your dues. It keeps the class going and able to keep reaching out to all the members. So anything else you guys want to touch base on? We've hit a lot. We've been about 15 minutes over our targeted time, and so
I mean, I think it was just pretty good wrap up of what a fun year 23 was. And, you know, I think it's exciting looking at the regatta schedule. I mean, going to Buffalo always is great for the class and a good time, and kind of going to the mecca of lightning sailing. So, I mean, hopefully everyone was out there, we'll start talking to the friends and getting places to stay and have a huge turnout there. That's the best place to go.
Jackson and Jeff and Madeline and Allan, thank you for our team behind the scenes. Thank you guys for running everything from behind the thing. This will all be available through a link that will get emailed to anybody, I think. Is that correct, Al? We'll email a link and I think
Yep, and it'll be on the, I think, North Sales YouTube channel.
YouTube channel typically after a little bit of time. So please reach out to any of us if you have questions. We're ready to help and maybe get you all set, ready, going for 2024. So appreciate you guys taking some time with us tonight, and be safe, and we'll see you on the water here in a few weeks, we hope.